All week long, the world's energy crisis has been grabbing newspaper headlines. In a nutshell, we're running short of petroleum resources, and the prices are zooming upwards. In 1970, the world price for oil was $1.80 a barrel. By next month, the world price will be $20 a barrel. And as headlines last week reminded us, Canadians are not immune. The extraordinary increase in the price of petroleum products has caused the most dramatic reordering of wealth in Canadian history. The New West has become rich, and the Old East, central Canada, has discovered it's dependent on the vast petroleum resources of the West for its economic well-being. Larry Pratt teaches political science at the University of Alberta. He says in his new book that the oil barons of the New West don't have much use for Eastern Canadian financial interests.
That's a very common attitude that you hear, when the oil industry was booming in the 30s and the 40s, we went to Bay Street. We walked the streets. I mean, I've talked to guys who said they had $100 in their pocket, and they went from one finance house and bank in Bay Street to another, looking for capital to try to develop a new well, and were unable to, and finally had to go to New York and sell out part of their company or be taken over. So there's a lot of bitterness. I think it's now become more of a kind of an attitude that, well, now it's our turn. That bitterness is kind of a legacy. It's turned into kind of an attitude, in some respects, of revenge, I think. But I wouldn't say that's endemic in Calgary. It's just that that's a sentiment that you often run into. And when people say, well, there's too much American ownership here, they'll turn around and they'll say, well, where the hell were you? Where was Bay Street? Where was Montreal when we needed them? Where was the federal government, for that matter?
And I think it would have been
Alberta Premier Peter Lougheed has warned his province the golden days of oil gushing forth like water, producing multi-billion-dollar profits, that those golden days are going to run out in about 10 years. Larry Pratt says the Premier is being alarmist with that prediction, that the West is going to get richer and richer and richer.
But clearly there's enough oil and natural gas, tar sands, coal to last Alberta and Canada a long time. The question is, how fast are the resources going to be developed and for whose benefit? I think Lougheed sees this kind of as the specter of suddenly the whole province is emptied of its natural resources and what is going to grow there. Well, that's unrealistic because first of all, we have renewable resources, which are very important in agriculture and so on, and that many of the non-renewable resources are so extensive, like the tar sands, that it will be well into the 21st century before scarcity becomes an acute problem. But, I mean, what his great thrust has been ever since he got into politics is diversify this economy. Let's get off oil. Let's get into something else. Let's build petrochemicals. Let's industrialize and so on. So I think he was trying to create a political base for that to some extent.
In terms of Canadian federalism, Larry Pratt thinks the provinces are going to get more and more powerful, and that Western premiers like Peter Lougheed are going to be leading the bandwagon for provincial rights, especially in the resources area. And, says Larry Pratt, the Alberta Premier may be looking for a political ally in Quebec.
I think what he's looking for is a kind of a deal with somebody like Claude Ryan, where Quebec would achieve certain goals and objectives that it regards as crucial to its self-determination within Canada, such as control over all cultural instruments and so on. And Alberta, in return, in part of a trade-off, would get full control over resources. And Saskatchewan would get the same thing, and the maritime provinces would get something else, fisheries and so on. And he sees this kind of special status for everybody. What you have to ask in looking at that is, well, where's the federal government left? I mean, what is left of Canada as a unit? Is there anything in Ottawa after all the provinces have chewed up little bits of federal powers?
In studying the new political dynamic in post-OPEC Canada, Larry Pratt has become convinced that a wholesale sell-off of PetroCan by the new Clark government would make very little economic sense. Pratt paints a doomsday energy scenario before making his PetroCan point.
To take a possible hypothesis that the scarcity of oil in the world gets worse, and we do have another crisis somewhere in the Middle East, and it's clear that Canada's facing harder times, and the oil companies then say, well, unfortunately, we can't develop the oil sands for you unless we get A, B, C, and D. Well, then Joe Clark is left with a position, having abolished PetroCanada, where he has no bargaining power, or less bargaining power. At that point, he has to face the leaders of the opposition across the House of Commons, who will say, you know, who sold PetroCanada at the time when we needed it? And it will become an issue in the next election campaign, whenever that is. And I think that, you know, it makes political sense, certainly in this part of the country and even in Alberta. People see the wisdom of having a powerful company that gives you some clout in dealing with the Arabs and in dealing with the international oil companies, all of whom understand that power is based on money and the control of resources and what you own. And I think that, you know, if you eliminate PetroCanada, you weaken your bargaining power with the Arabs, with the international oil companies, and with the provinces. And I think it's bloody stupid.
Russ Patrick, CBC News, Toronto.